Добрый день, дорогие друзья! Мне доставляет особое удовольствие приветствовать вас в этой необычной обстановке под сводами настольной палаты Патриаршего дворца и практически в экспозиции выставки Чарльза Ренни Макинтоша «Манифест нового стиля». Это нечастый случай, когда мы проводим лекции прямо на выставке, но благодаря поддержке Британского совета в рамках этого выставочного проекта мы предлагаем публике целую серию лекций, которые прочтут ведущие британские специалисты в области творчества Чарльза Ренни Макинтоша. Это кураторы, это известные эксперты, искусствоведы. И мое особое удовольствие представить вам сегодня Элисон Браун, специалиста в области графики и живописи Макинтоша. Она куратор коллекций европейского искусства с 19-21 века из музея Гроув, который входит в объединение музеев Глазго, объединение, именующееся Glasgow Life. И Элисон принимала самое непосредственное участие и в формировании этой экспозиции, и в создании каталога этой выставки. Сегодня она прочтет лекцию, посвященную чайным салонам или чайным комнатам Макинтоша, и название ее лекции можно, наверное, перевести как «На глазах у публики». Она расскажет об удивительном феномене, как в социальной истории и культуры Шотландии и Глазго, так и в сфере творчества Макинтоша. Пожалуйста, встречайте Элисон Браун.
Добрый день. Rada videt vas. It is a pleasure to be here, all the way from Glasgow, to speak to you today about Chарльz Renni Mackintosh's Tearoom designs. Now, when we think of Mackintosh, probably it is through the experimental designs he created for these tea rooms, fantastical interiors for Miss Kэtrin Krэнston over a 21-year period. We think of him, his experimentations and his drama. I'm going to show you here 3 of his high-back chairs. That one is displayed here from our collection in Glasgow, on loan here to the exhibition. The centre chair for Ingram Street tea rooms, designed in 1900. To the left, the Argyle Street high-back chair from about 1898, and on the right, the chair for the Willow tea rooms. We know that the young Mackintosh traced over designs for Scottish vernacular furniture, traditional furniture forms, as a way of streamlining these old designs to create his new modern fantasy and vision. High-back chairs are nothing new, but he just made them that bit higher. They frame the user. There's an elegance when you sit in them, your posture goes up, and when you have a square table or a round table with 4 of these chairs around, you are sort of enclosed by the furniture. So the tea room furniture creates an enclosure without creating a booth to divide the user from the rest of the room. The Argyle Street high-back, the first one he designed, on the left there, with that oval headrest, that frames the head of the user. It's got it's perceived to be a stylized flying bird cut out the top of that oval headrest. Now, this is designed in 1898, yet this is way ahead of its time, because if you look at Hollywood, TV, film, you will see that chair in Star Trek, in The Addams Family, in Blade. It has been repeatedly used and used again by set designers for reinterpreting the future, fantasy, science fiction. That's quite an achievement from a young Scottish architect at the end of the 19th century, to still be appearing as part of the future. And it perhaps gives an indication of why we celebrate and revere Mackintosh so highly, because he is ahead of his time. Mackintosh designed 4 tea rooms for Miss Kэtrin Krэнston. Only one of them, the Willow Tearooms, is still in use now as a tea room. And the Willow is the one on the top right. That's the Willow Tearooms on Sauchiehall Street. But he contributed significantly to these three other rooms, three other tea room complexes. So this is the first one that he was involved in on Buchanan Street. Now, Buchanan Street, Sauchiehall Street, and Argyle Street are all major shopping thoroughfares in the city. They were at the end of the 19th century, they are still today. Buchanan Street was the first tea rooms he contributed for. And Miss Crandon started decorating this building. This was a new building that she bought the site, knocked down the old building, and commissioned an architect, an Edinburgh architect, George Washington Brown, to create this stripy sandstone building just down from the department store that was Wiley and Lockhead's cabinet makers, furnitures and upholsterers. So this was in a significant area in the city. The first architect for this was George Walton. Mackintosh contributed mural schemes for this interior, and it opened on the 5th of May 1897. The next tea room Mackintosh was involved in was here at Argyle Street. Now you can see it's a shoe shop and mobile phone shops operate in the bottom areas, but then it was a 5-floor premises. And again, Mackintosh shared the design duties with George Walton. At the Willow Tea Rooms, which opened in 1903, Mackintosh had complete control. And the last one, which will be the second half of my talk really, is from Ingram Street. Now Ingram Street wasn't on a commercial shopping street. This was in the business district, the finance district. There were consulates, warehouses, banks, and it was right near the city chambers, which is where all our politicians, the councillors of the city, would meet and discuss business. The reason why this is boxed in yellow is because at Ingram Street, Miss Cranston's tea rooms only operated on the basement and the ground and mezzanine floors. So it was serving a particular client. And Mackintosh's involvement here is that he designed over an 11-year period. So Ingram Street's significant because we see his whole, sort of the period that he's working in Glasgow, we see under one building as his designs evolve. So this is the lady he designed them for. Now Miss Cranston, she is a local heroine. She was actually a Mrs. Cochrane, but she didn't operate under her married name. She married a John Cochrane, who was who basically became a provost of Glasgow. She married him in 1892, but she retained the family business name. She was actually from a family of hoteliers and restaurateurs. And you can see from her dress, she has a certain style. Now, this is a lady who understood what marketing and branding were before they were coined as terms. She's dressing in sort of mid-Victorian, big clothes. She's got quite a regal pose about her, quite a regal air, think Queen Victoria. She's trading on this premise of sort of good quality, going back to sort of looking back to something that's slightly old-fashioned, that's bringing, that basically is serving good quality food at a good quality price with traditional values. But what Miss Cranston brought to the tea room was she championed the young artistic designers, the young Scottish designers. The gentleman on her left there is her brother Stuart. Now he was a tea dealer. He set up his business in 1871. And in 1875, he is credited as being the person who created the idea of the tea room. In his tea shop on Argyle Street, he basically put some tables and chairs, and people could pay to have hot water poured on their tea leaves and maybe have a little bit of bread and butter or a biscuit or a cake for extra. So he is credited as starting the tea room revolution. And why was there a revolution? Well, there was a temperance movement to get people away from the demon drink, from alcohol, and to basically create sobriety, so the tea room phenomenon, and there's lots of tea rooms through the whole of Glasgow and the whole of Britain, basically was on the back of this, to get people out from drinking alcohol and out of the pub and into the tea room. So you can see here the little tea caddy spoon. You can see the marketing ploys here. There's no tea like Stuart Cranston's tea, and he had his own tea rooms as well. So you had 2 Cranstons in the telephone directories with their own tea rooms. He also was on the main thoroughfares in the city as well. And this little illustration on this cigarette case shows one of his tea rooms. Miss Cranston also had her own marketing as well. And she is famed for using the willow pattern, China, through all of her tea rooms. And you will see here that even her cutlery was branded. So those pieces from the Hunterian's collection and from our collection here. She would commission the china to be printed and imprinted on the base next to the maker's mark is Miss Cranston's. It's in the handles of her cutlery on the blade of this fruit knife. So we can see how they're promoting their tea rooms. They are a place to be seen, and they are targeting as well the middle classes. A lot of the ladies who are now using the shop here, going out shopping, it's a social place to meet and to be seen. And particularly when you're championing artistic designers, you create tea rooms that are a destination place, a talking point. Still the sort of thing we do today in interior decoration. So these are our 3 main characters for the talk today. Miss Cranston on the left, George Walton in the centre, and Chарльз Ренни Макинтош on the right. Miss Cranston didn't just promote these young interior designers. She also, through her menu cards, which tell us a huge amount about how these tea rooms operated, she championed some of the young female designers too. So this is a menu card designed by Jessie Marion King. She designed a couple for Miss Cranston. So you can see here on the back of this menu card, this little statement here says, Miss Cranston has by arrangement with the post office and national telephone companies introduced a service of telephones into her different tea rooms for use and convenience of her customers. So you see, they're not just a place to have the tea, they're not just a place to eat, they are a place to be used. There's a sort of little bit, a little bit of a business opportunity going. And in fact, some rooms become ladies' rooms where there's that opportunity for letter writing with desks that Mackintosh designs for those spaces. Miss Cranston also operated temporary cafes in the 2 international exhibitions in Glasgow in 1901 and 1911. And this is one of the menu cards from 1911. This is Margaret MacDonald Mackintosh, Chарльз Rенni Mackintosh's wife. She designed the menu card for the White Cockade tea room. We can see here on the back of it, we can see all the suppliers are listed. We can see that Miss Cranston had her own bakery here in St Vincent Street supplying the cake. And Margaret's younger sister Frances, this is her design for the menu card for the Red Lion tea rooms at the same park. All these international exhibitions, 1901, 1911, were in Kelvin Grove Park, right next to the art galleries, where much of this collection is now displayed to the public. So firstly, let's look at Buchanan Street. 4 floors, luncheon rooms, tea rooms, and at the very top, smoking rooms and games rooms. So this is another ploy to get the men away from the pubs, is you supply billiards rooms and spaces where they can play cards and dominoes and social spaces. There's accounts that basically once the men get out of the office situation, there's more of a sort of parity between their roles. They'll be playing billiards with each other, playing games. And new rules were instituted in the city in 1892 for the monitoring of playing billiards. Mackintosh contributed mural schemes here. Now, the interior decoration started in November 1896, and behind me you can see a worked up design for the mural scheme here, which this drawing is in the Hunterian Art Gallery at the University of Glasgow, and our museums have his early sketch design for this. This piece has a title called, it's called Part Scene, Imagined Part. It's drawing in pencil watercolour with gold pigment on tracing paper, and well, the design is of a lady. She seems slightly Japanese. She's certainly of the Art Nouveau style. She's got those sort of kickbacks in the hair, little kinks in the hair. She's like she's wearing a Japanese kimono, but she is dissolving This is why she's part seen and part imagined. She's dissolving into these rose briars underneath. And there's little telltale parts of the design that you see later emerging in the Glasgow School of Art. These, the plant forms that grow around her head form these little sort of little flower shapes at the top. You see that later very much stylized in the metalwork at the front of the Glasgow School of Art. And so this design, which was exhibited at the Arts and Crafts exhibition in London in April 1896, gets worked up into this mural scheme. And the mural scheme expands. You can see over here, I'm going to stand over here so you can see this, this amazing sort of tree design shape, but also this is the period they called the Spook School. And if you can see over here, can you see those eyes peering out either side of the tree? There's always something eerie going on. There's always eyes in the work at this time. So this isn't all just nice and pretty. There's other mysterious things going on at the same time. Mackintosh did not design the furniture. This was George Walton. George Walton was actually in charge of pretty much the whole interior scheme, and it's Mackintosh's contribution is in 3 murals for this interior. This is another aspect. We're looking out onto Buchanan, the front of Buchanan Street there, and you can just see to the right, you can see the start of this other mural scheme. It's an even darker mural scheme than the one of the progression of ladies. And that's it straight on. We've got peacocks, blue and green. The original design drawings survive for this, and we've got these sumptuous jade greens and bright blues and gold. And they too have this strange sort of series of trees cutting between the peacocks, and lots of interesting little flower shapes. Some look like butterflies, some look like leaves emerging from the bottom of the frieze. If you go around the exhibition and look around that side, you'll see some of the stencil cards from Buchanan Street on display here. And they're displaying these little central sections here. Each one of these is different and different colours. And we know from the stencil cards that survive, we have an idea of the colour scheme. So we've got olive greens and sort of light lime greens and burgundies. Gives us an idea for how vibrant the colour schemes in these tea rooms were. On the very top floor, on the 4th floor, was the smoking gallery. So you can see with the vent light, you can see the daylight streaming down here. And there's an even more stylized scheme that Mackintosh contributes, where you've got this sort of sad-looking sun or moon sinking into a wavy line of clouds. And again, these stylized stencils of plant forms. Mackintosh designed the scheme, but he didn't execute it. John Guthrie, one of the a firm of interior decorators, they undertook the stenciling for this interior. This room, which is adjacent, so we were in the smoking gallery just now, which is out through there. So we have now moved into the front of the tea rooms, and we're in the billiards room and card room. This is completely designed by Walton. So this gives you a nice contrast between what Mackintosh's very modern contribution is and Walton, which is more entrenched in the arts and crafts movement. We've got a sort of Burne-Jones mural scheme here. You can sort of make out the horses and the greyhounds, the birds, knights and ladies. And we have Walton's very nice stylized furniture here. This is an Abingdon armchair with cut-out hearts. And even the table has these heart shapes in little dishes where the counters would have been placed for playing games. Notice as well how this is a smoking room. You've got your ashtrays sitting under the billiards table. And in all billiards rooms, the seats for the players are raised on a little dais so they can actually see what's going on at the billiards table. So we can see key early Glasgow style motifs appearing here, particularly the heart around the fireplace, in the chairs, sort of hanging these brass constructions hanging around the light fittings. At Argyle Street, which work starts on in 1897 and it's completed in 1898, Walton and Mackintosh again share design duties. Miss Cránston, this is actually the location where Miss Cránston had operated her first tea rooms in 1878. This had been a temperance hotel, and she eventually took over the whole of the building. So originally she just occupied the ground floor, and you can see here that's the little entranceway with nice little repoussé metal on the doorway, little bow windowed front here. So this is your main entrance into the tea rooms. the design roles were changed at Argyle Street. Mackintosh designed the furniture, and Walton was mainly responsible for the light fittings and mural schemes. Two pieces of furniture on display there, on the screen there, are on display here behind me. These are solid bits of furniture. Now these are designed to be used, and when you look at the pieces on display, you can see they've been knocked around a bit over the years. We haven't done restoration to make them look as if they're pristine and new, but they're survivors. If you think of the footfall in these tea room interiors that would have used these bits of furniture over time, they have endured incredibly. They are solid, strong bits of stained oak, sometimes just polished oak. Simple volumed shapes, but with little interest, like the table, you can see, just very sophisticated. This is Mackintosh starting to play around with cut-out shapes, just to lighten the dark, solid bodies of bits of furniture. So here, you always have these little plant forms hiding away. So here it's like a little shoot of a plant cut within a circle, but it's not a perfect circle. The circle has a little impression at the bottom, so it just lifts it. And then that with the curtain, the bottom curtain of the carcass of the table, just lifts it. So it's like and with the tapering feet, it's like it's on tippy toe. There's just these lovely little touches that Mackintosh makes to the furniture that changes it from being a solid block to something that's lightened and has a little bit of movement and grace to it. And we can see around the scheme here typical elements of Walton's design. This is one of his, this stag, the sort of leaping stag primed within sort of oak leaves, is one of his key motifs that appears again and again through his designs at this time. And Walton has even stenciled with rose designs and geometric designs the undersides of the ceiling area. Here we have another Walton scheme with Mackintosh's furniture. Mackintosh is a draftsman in an architect's office. Walton is running his own interior design and decorating company. By the time he's working on Argyle Street, he is actually commuting between Glasgow and London. So he's overseeing this scheme, overseeing all the men who are implementing this scheme, because he ran a cabinet making company which had workshops for stained glass and metalwork, so, for the mural and stencil production. So we have Walton's wallpaper here in the interior, and then this panel, which survives, is one of two sections that were salvaged in the 1980s when there were refurbishment happening in the building, and is now in our museum collection. That's the lower part of this wall panelling. In here, we can see that the wall panelling had little squares or rectangles of beaten metal and glass inset into them. In 1896, Walton's workshop set basically added stained glass production and metal to its output. And this panel that you see here is actually that door panel there at the back. So that accesses the back stair tower. So it's clear glass, light will come through it, but it's also opaque glass in places. And you have this repoussé copper, so the copper has been worked from the back, just rounded, so that it catches the light. Now, Scotland is not sunny every day of the year. Scotland is quite grey and rainy, particularly in the winter. And so on the darker winter months, these tea rooms would be open, and it would not be natural light that would be illuminating these interiors in those darker days. It would be the electric or gas light inside. So to me, Walton's use of copper and opaque glass is an interesting device, because when there's daylight, you would be getting colour from the glass. But when you've got the interior illumination solely, the lead lines, the copper, and the opaque glass would be providing the colour and the interest around the interior. One thing to point out with this, and this gives you an idea of the scale of production that intrigues me with Walton's business. These look like they're stenciled, but they're not. These three panels are actually painted by hand. Now there's been a template just to key in and mark where those leaves go, where the lines go, where the little red sort of flower buds go. But that has been painted by hand. When you look at the size of this room, and you look at that photograph that showed Argyle Street, all 5 floors of it, and you look at that scale of production, if that's painted by hand, this is a huge project. This is a huge business project that Walton has overseen. Walton also has a shop operating in York as well. And he is choosing, by this stage, to move down to London more, to relocate and refocus on his business interests. And this is really Walton's last involvement with Miss Crandon. He had designed interiors for her at Argyle Street in 1888. He had designed interiors for her own home some 10 years later. But by 1900, the mantle is really passed to Mackintosh, and he becomes Miss Cranston's sole designer for her tea rooms and also for her own domestic interiors. And here's just to look at an alternative, another version of that repoussé copper. Here, these little panels are inset round the fireplace. So we've got this opalescent, marbled opalescent streaky glass in blues and greens. And there would have been 7 of these panels, along with the copper grate and fire surround. And you can see this is in the billiards room, because this scoreboard is sitting over the top of the fireplace as well. So imagine that with a fire roaring, and you imagine the effect that would be giving of a cold winter's evening. Now, this is to indicate how big a concern the billiards were. This is the billiards hall. We've got Mackintosh's chairs. So a version of the chair that you've got on display here, we've got a slightly longer finial at the backrest on the raised dais. This is the games area. And you can see with the bays in this room how many tables there were. So imagine the noise. Imagine what this was like when it was being utilised. Quite an amazing space. And from another viewpoint, looking back towards the fireplace. So I'm going to move on to the willow next. I'm slightly jumping out of chronology, but this is the grandest, most luxurious of Mackintosh's tea rooms. It's the one that's still operating. The building was refurbished in the late 1970s, and it has been operating since then, partially as a tea room. The building changed hands, it became a department store, and for dailies, which operated in a neighbouring building, walls were knocked through and it became part of Daly's department store. The photo on the left shows what it looked like when it first opened. It opened on the 28th of October, 1903. And when you look in the newspaper accounts, it was the wettest month on record. Now, the British press are always liking to say that it's the wettest month on record, and in 1903 it was. And just as a little aside, to give you a flavour of what the times were like, they were trying in the papers to work out what the reason for this amount of rain was. And theories ranged from sunspots, because there was a lot of activity around the sun. Mr. Marconi had sent his first 2 transatlantic messages, so they thought those radio waves might have affected the atmosphere. And then there was this newfangled thing called the automobile that can't be doing any good. So there was lots of ideas, lots of theories. The press was interesting because in the same reports that the tea room is opened, they actually, a person had written in complaining about the landscaping of Glasgow streets and saying that people could do with taking a leaf out of a certain lady restaurateur's books and putting trees outside their premises to prettify the city's shopping streets. And when we look here at the willow, we see 2 little pom-pom trees sitting in planters. They are perfectly aligned to these metal sort of wrought iron forms that sit at the top of the window level. So Miss Crandon is not mentioned by name in this letter, but she is known, and her contribution to the city is obviously admired by many. This is from a series of photos that were taken when the building was first restored in the 70s, and I thought this is quite interesting to show you the volumes, interior volumes of the Willow. So we've just come in off the main street. This area here is the front luncheon room, and then you walk into the back area. There's a mezzanine area. You can see the light coming down from skylights above. And the design of the Willow has a sort of front and a back feel, because the back of the tea rooms, that back area, and these are different sets of different images from different angles, archive and again taken in the late 70s to show that interior. The stenciling scheme there is of ladies and roses, and the colouring is more is silver, silvers and pinks. We've got interesting stained glass and mirror panels set above the fireplaces. So we can see it's got its own sort of unique design, stylized design at the back. But at the front, it's a very different feel. And when the tea rooms opens, basically it is said that the willow motif is prevalent throughout. Now, this is in the newspaper reports at the time, and I'm fascinated to think, how did people know? Did they just react to Mackintosh's designs? Did they actually understand what he's referring to, this willow pattern? Or was he on site telling people? Was Miss Crenston on site telling people? Was there a press release explaining the artistic thinking behind the design? I'm fascinated to think how the promotion of these rooms were at that time. So we've come in through the front door, which is the other side of that screen, and Mackintosh has thoughtfully put this leaded glass screen in to divide the diners from the cold draft coming in from the main door. And then they could choose to go upstairs to the upper level, or they could come in round the screen into this area here. The checkerboard starts running throughout this tea room. There's little vertical lines and horizontal lines that keep cross-hatching. You can see it here in the leaded glass. You can see it in the furniture. And the most important piece of furniture from this room sits just at the top of that step between the front and the back room. And that's the waitress's chair, which is in the School of Art collection. And that you have this amazing manifestation of this checkerboard. You can say, potentially, it is a stylized willow tree with the stalk and the cross-hatching of the lines indicating the long pendulous branches coming down and cross, and this very stylized form of a tree. Because there are trees throughout most of Mackintosh's work, either directly referenced or inferred. There's an article, a lot of these archive photographs are from Decorative Kunst, where there was a piece written in depth about the Willow tea rooms. And I'm just going to quote you a translation of the excerpt from this account. Follow the beckoning finger of the willow leaves on the wall and climb to the stairway to that unique crystal portal. Once inside, they will be in the white room, and all at once the significance of this white room will come home to them. So this is the stairs to climb. You're looking down in that front tea room. You've got these stylized plaster panels, these relief plaster panels of willow forms. You have these wrought metal panels threaded with glass beads and little green glass droplets hanging from the screen. So this is a magical space, and it's interesting to think of this account of how you move through the space, because the portal, the crystal portal, is obviously referring to the room deluxe on the floor above. This is one of the photographs that's published in Decorative Kunst from 1903. The high-back chair, silver with plush purple velvet, perfectly laid out within the confines of a design in the carpet. You can see these dark square borders are almost setting the guidelines for where the chair needs to be placed. Everything has its position in here. And this is it as it looks. This was taken about 5 years ago when the leaded glass doors were returned to the building after conservation and restoration. There are 58 panels, repeating panels, of mirrored and purple glass that line round three sides of the room. They are not all identical because the door in the middle divides them, and there is a sort of pendulous line to these. The ones on the left sway slightly to the left, and the ones on the right sway slightly to the right. There's a movement in these panels, and it is also reflected by the fact that the glass is not perfectly flat. It reflects the light around. I think you can see from this photograph just how crazy the reflections in this room really are. And it's worth go to Glasgow and sit and have a cup of tea in this space because it really is quite magical. So looking at the door straight on, this is Mackintosh's largest piece of stained glass. They're actually quite impractical for being swing doors coming into a busy tea room space. You have a mixture of clear glass, drawn lead lines, enamelled opalescent glass in greens, purples, and to add a little bit of depth and clarity, a mixture of white opalescent and cast translucent cabochons, which give a sort of reflected silvery light. These are all colours of the willow tree. The purples, the greens, the silvery fronds. If you think of some willow trees, one side has a more sort of bluey grey quality, the other side is silvery, slightly fuzzy. And I think Mackintosh has brought those colours, those natural colours, into this interior. So fundamentally, why is willow a motif in this building? Well, the Willow Tearooms are on Sauchiehall Street, and Sauchiehall in Gaelic means alley of willows. So Mackintosh is taking the literal translation of the name of the street in the centre of Glasgow, and in a way putting its druidic history, one could almost say, back into the city centre. Because the willow tree has a huge amount of mythos attached to it, and a huge amount of classical association as well. In terms of the design, I'm referring to the poster, it's just there on the wall, for the Scottish Musical Review. Because that poster design is 1896, and I always think Mackintosh's posters are setting out a sort of manifesto for how to divide up the picture plane to create the perfect, harmonious and proportional design. And I think you can see some link between these two in how the picture plane is divided up. It's subdivided into thirds or quarters on the vertical and the horizontal. The placing of the circular or the curved forms at a particular point to focus the eye. At first reading, you think these are probably roses, because Mackintosh always created these stylized roses. But I have another theory that these are probably mistletoe, because mistletoe is a parasite plant, and it basically seeks home in parent trees, sends out long lines that basically join into the tree itself to basically suck the nutrients from the tree and sustain itself. And the mistletoe, like the willow, has lots of druidic connotations as well. Only 13 years earlier, George Henry and E.A. Hornell collaborated on a painting called The Druids Bringing in the Mistletoe, which is a significant Celtic revival symbolist painting, and was exhibited in the city. It is very well known from that time. So this dividing of the picture plane surface, you see here in the willow, it appears in the plaster panels, it appears in the wrought metal panels around the room. So it's the whole of the Willow Tearooms is this series of plain sort of segments that divide the interior space and create a unified repeating patterns scheme. So I do feel once you were in the room, you would be feeling sort of perhaps immersed with this leaf and tree symbol. In the room deluxe were these three magnificent chandeliers. They are formed by glass droplets. Cooper's, the City Glassworks, was basically commissioned by Mackintosh. The workbooks indicate that he ordered 860 of these glass drops of different sizes and shapes. You can see how they're threaded together, cradled. This is one of the few surviving ones in the stair screen, cradled together with brass wire. knotted around and then hanging from threads. You can see there's a lot of light bulbs sitting amongst these, on the metal bracket round there, lots of electric light bulbs, and then hanging further down around here. So this was daylit in the day, but at night you would have had the electric light, basically bouncing light. You can see from this photograph, you can see how the light was bouncing around the room on the barrel vaulted ceiling in the tea room. And the chandeliers were not the only place where these glass droplets were. Margaret's gesso panel, which we'll look at next, sat within a frame with these glass droplets above, and this little detail from her panel has little glass cabochons set into the gesso work. Margaret provided a figurative focal point for this interior. Her gesso panel is called O Ye, O Ye That Walk in Willow Wood. It is based on a sonnet by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, the pre-Raphaelite poet, and she has very cleverly, in one composition, created, basically interpreted the whole of Rossetti's sonnet. And to summarise, a man has lost his love. He goes to Willow Wood, where it is known that the ghosts of the dead roam, and he has gone to basically reflect on his loss. And as he sits down by the pond, highlighted by the green oval here, and he sees these ghostly figures walking through the willow wood, their white skin and their dark hair and their red lips, he starts a conversation with a personification of love who comes and sits next to him. And at the end of their conversation, he looks in the pond and he sees his reflection, and it changes to that of his lovers. And so he goes to bend down to the water and kiss those lips one last time. And so you have his hand touching the water, creating ripples, but also a rose. And then you look along the top of the fingertips and you see the eye, and he's crying at his loss. So this is a very spiritual panel to sit within this interior. Now, Miss Crandon charged 2p extra to have your tea in this room. This was intended to be an experience up in this room. And I'm going to go back to decorative Kunst, because this is a nice little conclusion before we move away from the willow. A feeling of religious presence, an unoppressive one, is transmitted, which in no way detracts from its mood of comfort and freshness. It is an honest heathen religion. That's how they view this interior. It's more than just an interior. The willow Mackintosh went back to very late on in his career. In 1917, Miss Crandon created the dugout in the basement of the Willow Tearooms, and this is one of Mackintosh's designs for it. He was working in London at that time, so these designs were sent up. We can see how he has moved away from those white, silvered interiors into a much more geometrical focus. So lastly, we're going to look at Ingram Street. Now, Ingram Street is particularly of interest to me because we have the interiors in our collection. It is now a commercial block. This was basically an office and warehouse block, which Miss Crandon first opened her first rooms in this area here in 1886, and then expanded gradually as adjacent units came free. So her last tea rooms opened in the corner here in 1907. That was the last new part of the addition to the building. And then tea rooms that were accessed at the back here opened in 1909, 1910. And she was running this business up to 1920. It is the last of the tea rooms that she let go of. Her husband died in 1917, and the Willow Tea Rooms was the first of the tea rooms to be passed on to other businesses. But she retained an interest in Ingram Street. And they are of interest for us for Mackintosh because we can see that from these little cross sections I've put here of these different interiors he designed, we can see his evolution from his Glasgow career. From these light white interiors on the left of 1900, he moves through to his last interiors designed in 1911, which start looking towards what he was designing at the dugout at the Willow Tea Rooms some 6 years later. So this is a nice little photograph that shows what Miss Cranston's tea rooms were like when that first room opened in 1886. It's an aesthetic interior. Mackintosh has got nothing to do with this. She was championing other aesthetic interior designers at the time. We've got a lovely starburst ceiling here. We've got sort of big gas lights on the wall, and we can see shadowy things there. There's lots of leaded glass of different colours and different designs. So this is probably quite a busy interior. The tea rooms operated as tea rooms until 1950. And some of the photographs I'm showing you here is what happened to the tea rooms after 1950. They basically became shop space. You can see cabinets were installed there was lots of knickknacks and sort of Scottish souvenirs in one of the shops here. We can see but Mackintosh's designs have been kept. The panelling has been kept intact. And it's what basically led in 1971 to when the interiors were going to be gutted for the building to be completely renovated, that interested parties in the city campaigned to save the interiors. And it was an all hands on deck plan of action for everything to be documented and removed and put into store. So the photos at the bottom are from the 1950, and it shows various members of the city fathers having tea in how the rooms looked like at the time. This is a bit of the cloister room, this is a bit of the Chinese room. We can see that the furniture, these aren't Mackintosh chairs, everything has got mixed up and muddled around and moved around. So not everything was salvaged. There was a deliberate decision made at the time that only the things that were by Mackintosh were salvaged from these interiors in 1971, and everything came into store. 3,000 bits of wooden panelling, 300 fittings, and pieces of furniture. And so this just gives you an idea of some of the pieces. We don't have everything in our collection, but we have a lot. And over the years, we have conserved, restored, documented, researched. And what I'm going to show you now is that process to say what we have found out about Mackintosh, what we can understand about the designs, but also some of the questions we have to ask ourselves as well in presenting Mackintosh. In 1992, we started conserving and restoring one of the early tea rooms, and it's the one that had an archive photograph taken in 1900. This is the ladies' luncheon room, often referred to as the white dining room of that time. So this has got gesso panels in it by Mackintosh and Margaret. They were making these gesso panels at the time of their marriage. It is a white interior with, again, one of these leaded glass screens that divides the diners off from the cold draft of the city street. And that yellow photograph, that's not a bad coloured photograph, that's what it was looking like when it was in store, as it was being worked on. The wood had bent into banana shapes and had to be very carefully pulled back into shape to rebuild. The gesso panels had been overpainted over time, and these are a high relief. That banner that's sitting there dividing this gallery space up, you can see this is a high relief gesso panel. It's very theatrical. It is a loose weave Hessian which has had scrim applied over the top, plaster applied over the top, and string. The lines on these gesso panels are drawn by string pinned to the canvas, and then plaster shapes modelled and applied. So this was a big restoration job. And there's an element of like a geological timeline, because in restoring these rooms, you take away, the room had been freshened up. Yes, you know what it's like with your own interiors. You paint every so often to freshen up the woodwork. Well, after a while, all those layers of paint create a sort of record of the room. And you can see here where there was smoking involved, and when probably it was Daly's department store, and it was the where it was used as the warehouse and maybe and the shop area, and that was basically not. So I'm getting confused with my tea rooms there, because we did the same at the Willow Doors. So you can see this sort of timeline of when it was used for a tea room, when there was smoking, when there perhaps wasn't smoking, when things just yellowed with age, because originally this is lead paint, and lead paint also changes colour over time. So this slide is just to show you how it was pieced together to create this. And this was how it looked in 1996, and it was unveiled at the Chарльz Renni Mackintosh exhibition in the McClellan Galleries. What was interesting with the examination was that the east and west wall panels had had a metal leaf applied to the wooden panels. So you've got cool northerly light coming in from the window wall here, and that light is bounced down using this metal leaf to reflect the light and give a nice soft glow. You have an avenue of stylised trees in the leaded glass. And you have, this is the Wassail by Mackintosh. It's 4.5 metres long, that panel. And from this side, you can see the May Queen by Margaret MacDonald. They worked on these over the time of their marriage, and the panels, before they went into the tea room, were actually exhibited in Vienna, at the 8th Vienna Secession exhibition. They are actually constructed in 3 parts, so they would be quite easy to disassemble and create. And it was an immense process of basically going back to the original materials. We sourced horsehair upholstery for the window seats to try and match what was there originally. We had to create the window seats because not everything, something like that, which was partly structural, wasn't removed. We had to source some of the pink glass to try and get as near we could a match to the original glass of the time. After the success of that tea room, the conservation team started work on 2 further rooms. We received lottery money to work on these. So this is part of the Chinese room and the cloister room, but just to show the space we were working in on these interiors. And this is the reality. You see that lovely ladies' luncheon room of that was restored in '96, but this is going back to the reality of what these other rooms look like. And you can also see the documentation method here, because each room was given a number. This is from room 11, it's the oval room. The U stands for upper, because the oval room was on the upper mezzanine level. The S stands for south, because it was part of the south wall, and the number 2 is because it's the second panel along on the south wall. So you can see a numbering system was applied and how these rooms were then dismantled and put into store. And they have had all sorts of problems. There was a local fire in one of the storage. It's moved storage sites so many times. So there's fire damage, water damage, and some parts weren't even removed because while it was still in the building, there was rot. But it is a suite of Mackintosh interiors, and we can learn a lot from these. And between 2004 and 2007, we appointed a project team with Scottish executive funding money to actually assess the interiors to find out exactly what we had, what we didn't have, what we needed to know, what we could possibly find out. And a team of 4 people set to work, working with a permanent staff in the museums to document these interiors. We ended up using a system based on below ground archaeology to actually recreate the rooms. So you can see here 2 members of the team are laying out pieces of the oak room from 1907, and they're laying them on the floor. This was then creating these little, we call them assemblages. So sections of adjacent pieces of panelling were laid on the floor, and you can see the string grid over the top. Now the string grid and the colour chart is creating your scale bars and colour bars. And then on here, there's a couple of dollies, and a camera was mounted directly pointing down onto these pieces of panelling. So every bit of panel had a composite set of photos taken, and you can see here then those images were all being manipulated on a computer to create these photographic assemblages, and from these we could then recreate with 1 to 20 scale models what the interiors actually looked like. And so this is the oak room from 1907, and it starts giving you an idea of the volumes of these spaces. Mackintosh worked with Miss Kränstons between 1900 and 1912 on these interiors. This is the ground floor, so we can see the different rooms that were added at different times. The ladies' luncheon room, that white interior, is located here. The oak room you just saw the detail of is over here. Some of the later rooms at the front and back. And we created a whole set of these 1 in 20 square models. So you can actually see how these spaces interrelated, because it's also interesting to bear in mind is as Mackintosh is designing, these rooms are meant to be seen from each other. You've got viewpoints and vistas basically creating through the different doors. This room was not salvaged because Mackintosh didn't design it. That was the Scott Morton room of 1888, and it did not get salvaged in the 1971 exercise. In the basement, in Grove Street, this is where the billiards rooms were. There were 2 billiards rooms, a ladies' dressing room that was accessed from the back, a ladies' room on the ground floor. So much simpler. Staircase, the billiards area, smoking area, and a second billiards room. You can see where there's white card, those panels weren't salvaged because they were rotten. And then this gives you an idea of the relationship of these rooms. So I'm just, room by room, going to show you what these designs were like. You can see that mirror on display behind me here. This sat at the back of the ladies' toilets. There were 2 of them. They sat on the wall here. You entered this area from the ladies' luncheon room. Gents' toilets at the back. Gents' toilets has lots of graffiti. It's very interesting. The cloister room which is a lovely barrel vaulted room. This is the last room Mackintosh designed. Designs in 1911, so it would have been completed by 1912. This room, in the recreation work that we did in 2000 to 2002, a sculptor came in to recreate the barrel vaulted ceiling, as only one of these segments had survived. You've got that stepped panelling. The colouring is very like the Glasgow School of Art, that was on the Glasgow School of Art library, of this sort of twisted lozenge pattern in reds and greens and blues and yellows. And at the far end is a very sort of Art Nouveau type tree. There's some interesting forms at the back here. And there's leaded mirrored glass set in the walls at the back, strips of leaded mirrored glass. There would have been illumination, so again, light would have been bounced around at the far end of what was actually quite a dark room. The ventilation system was put in when Mackintosh designed this room, we know from the workbooks, and there's a grid, there's an open sort of grid system up through these light fitting, where these light fittings would have, lights would have come down through the ceiling area, and the ventilation shaft must have been up there, because this was used as a men's smoking room at one point. And this shows you some of the processes that the team went through. Only one bit of the ceiling, plaster ceiling, survived. And the sculptor basically created a fiberglass replica of that with using jesmonite. This is the form that he sculpted to recreate the ceiling textures. And so a lightweight ceiling was then added using jesmonite and fiberglass. Not much of the servery survives at the back. This archive photograph shows what the servery is. There would have been all these cabinets laid out with all the condiment sets and the jam pots and cutlery. So this was a through area for the waitresses to get to the kitchens. And this front part was Mackintosh's first version for the cloister room. And you can see looking in here, that screen into the later 1911 cloister room beyond. The Chinese room of 1911. It's interesting that these rooms with the most sort of foreign influences, the cloister room is very Moorish, the Chinese room, which has Japanese and Chinese elements to the design, are both created in 1911, and so probably responding to the international exhibition in the city of that year. This little box here is the cash desk, because on the main exit of all these tea rooms, a waitress would have sat. So she was self-contained in here, taking the money from all the guests on the way out. And what's interesting with how Mackintosh has dealt with the Chinese room is that he's lowered the ceiling height. He's pulled these lamps down to spend in through these ceiling grids to basically create a lovely enclosed space, and used leaded mirrored glass and plastic to divide up and light up that dark interior space. This is part of the reconstruction process that went through in 2002 to 2011. You can see the team at work. A lot of paint analysis was made to try and get back to that original colour, because this room had been painted so many different blues at so many different times. And it was decided upon, this is a bit of the wood, so it decided upon that this colour, this sort of muted sort of Prussian blue, was the original paint surface of Mackintosh. And so the room was resurfaced and refinished with a new lead version of that paint. And you can see these motifs. There's one of the key Chinese motifs. It appears at the top of the cash desk, and at this construction that sat in the back door that led through to the cloister room originally, the Chinese pattern key sort of cloud motif carved into the top. This is quite sophisticated work. These box panels sat here with leaded mirrored glass and leaded plastic. This is a very early plastic that Mackintosh is using. He's experimenting with new materials. And the more research we did into these rooms, the more we started just seeing how innovative he was. There was this brilliant relationship between Mackintosh and Miss Crandon, in a way, because she got these amazing new designs for interiors, and he got an opportunity to experiment. The oak room, which Mackintosh designed in 1907, is seen as a precursor to the Glasgow School of Art library. Basically, it's a tall room, it has a mezzanine level on 3 sides, and it has this sort of stylized tree device that runs from floor to ceiling. This is the only photograph we know of the tea room actually in use, and this is taken in 1950. it shows a later, probably, layout of that tea room space. At the back of the oak room, we have the oval room at the top and the ladies' restroom below. So these are the rooms that Mackintosh designed writing tables for and couches for. We don't have much furniture from this room, but it certainly seems to be the area that was being promoted as facilitators for basically people meeting, ladies meeting with, for business and being able to rest between business engagements. So Miss Crenston, by 1909, is promoting these spaces for use by women in a particular way. And these archive photographs were taken in 1971. So you can see here at the back of the oval room, you've got a gold leaf applied to little glass tiles, always about creating surfaces that reflect light and add interest into what otherwise are quite dark spaces. The window at the back would have been looking out onto the middens, as we call them in Scots vernacular, the bin area, the waste area, the back courts. There wouldn't have been a huge amount of daylight coming in from that space. Down to the basement and into the billiards and smoking room below. Mackintosh is having to come up with design solutions because these are operational spaces. So we've got the raised benches here for viewing the billiard table, and this area got converted. Now, this is under the pavement. Where I'm moving the marker, there would have been little glass lights in the pavement surface for light to come down from the pavement into this darkened corridor. This got turned into the gents' toilets when the second billiards rooms were added at the time. And we can see from, again, this is one of the few archive photographs from Ingram Street that show how it works. We've got a cue rack and a scoreboard above the fireplace. And this is the second billiards room. So quite plain, and there's not even traces of a stenciled floral pattern in this room as there was in the 1900 room. And then at the back, little ladies' dressing room that was accessed probably from the oval room and the ladies' restroom from the staircase back there down into this back area. And there's lovely little bits of interest with little touches of Mackintosh on the little wall cabinet here and on the towel rails, which were white painted originally with leaded blue, with blue enamel glass. We have seen what these interiors are like. They are practical spaces. They are interesting in seeing how Mackintosh created design solutions for spaces that were already basically given volumes. He's not designing the volumes contain these rooms, he's manipulating how to put interior paneling into the room to maximize those spaces. The Chinese room is interesting, and this is a little bit of the Chinese room that we have on display in Kelvin Grove, because these box panels are not perfect rectangled panels. These wall box panels that have the leaded mirrored glass and the plastic, on one side they are wider than the other. And it's only through reconstructing that interior that we discovered that the room itself was not a rectangle. It actually had one wall that was sloping. So Mackintosh had created an optical illusion by compensating for these box panels for the depth and side for the eye to then create the room that it was actually had a perfect vanishing point at the, with a perfect sense of perspective at the front when viewed. We could not display a whole tea room in our Mackintosh and Glasgow style gallery in Kelvin Grove. So we chose for our displays to show little segments so that we could tell this story of Mackintosh's design evolution through his tea room interiors and give a little sense for how these interiors worked. And this is looking through to a little segment from the ladies' luncheon room, so you can see how we have displayed things. We have put the gesso panels up high to give that same sense of that theatricality of these of them within the space. And we have re-established the leaded glass screen and a table to give that sense of how people would move around the rooms. The tea rooms were an amazing opportunity for Mackintosh to experiment and create innovative design. You can see elements of these interiors throughout the rest of his work. You can see where he was playing with ideas. He and Miss Crenston had a fantastic working relationship, and I would say that from that point of view, we can argue that Miss Crenston is probably Mackintosh's greatest patron, because they worked together over a 21-year period. This is an excerpt from the Bailey, local magazine, Glasgow magazine, and July 1911 from a regular article or regular feature called Men You Know. Note it's men. And Miss Cránston is one of only 5 women to actually get in the Men You Know section. This is the section championing people who are doing good things for the city. And I think it's very interesting in what these words say. Her name is a household word in Glasgow and the rest of Scotland. Her renown has spread far and wide. Gifted with original ideas, business capacity and courage, Miss Cránston early saw the possibilities of the tea room if carried out on fresh and original lines, and straightway struck on a new path, on which have trooped in due course hosts of followers, not in Glasgow only, but throughout the kingdom. I think that gives a good indication of where she sat in the business sense, but also in what Mackintosh's contribution was to her business. So I finished there, and so thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.